Hey guys, it's Track Bro here. Just sipping on some Monster. Not feeling too well right now, but I'll be tracking some other day. Today, I wanted to make a video after watching Running to Redline's American V8 engine tier list. It's not a bad video, but it is missing a lot of engines, and it's also missing some precedence, I would say. And what I mean by that is, the reason you make a tier list video, you have to convey to the audience, and the audience could be two kinds of people. They could be children that have never worked on engines, have never driven a car, blah blah blah, or you could talk to the consumer, the people that will actually compare these engines in real life and actually need some advice. I believe that we're looking at the latter in this video. We're going to be looking at the latter. And the thing with the original video here is that when you're a consumer and you're trying to buy these engines, there's really only 4 different ways you're going to look at it. You're trying to build a quarter-mile car, you're trying to build a track car, you're trying to build a daily driver, or you're trying to buy a collector's engine. These are really the only four I can think of off my head. Everything else kind of goes in between. Like, for instance, a street performer will probably be very similar to a quarter-mile guy. Only real difference would be like tires and such. So we're going to try to look at it that way. And the reason why I say that is because in the video, it seemed as though he took some engines that were just uncomparable, apples to oranges. Because the way he was comparing them was with sound and performance and power numbers, I mean. When in reality, when you look at some of these engines, like say an SVT Lightning's truck engine versus a 4.63 valve out of a Mustang, they're not going to have the same consumer. They're not going to have the same buyer. So to make this video, we're going to have to compare these apples to apples. And I believe the main aspects that make these American V8 engines so great is the fact that they're tunable, they're very cheap, they have high life expectancy, and they make tons of power. There is no other engine like an American engine that can make 100+ horsepower after the first stage tuning. That is only with the American V8s. There's no other engine like it. Bar none, except for maybe the Germans, but of course reliability becomes a concern even after a chip tune. So we're not even going to get into that. I told you I was sick. Anyway, we're going to get into this video now. I made a couple changes. The first one is exotic, hot rod, and old reliable. What does this mean? Well, simply put, exotic means that you're more looking at the experience over the price. So tunability kind of goes out the window, and just stock price goes out the window. So this is more for the collector guy, for the guy that wants a slight tunable experience, and maybe the track guy. That's pretty much it. Hot rod, it's more about the price. It's also about the swappability, being able to swap it into different engines. It's a flexible engine, flexible platform. And old reliable, which is really low on the list, what it means is you're not looking for any kind of tunability. You don't care about that. So it doesn't matter if you can't make 100 horsepower off the first tune. It doesn't matter. What matters is that in its stock form, it's reliable as hell. And I'm sure you guys you can imagine which engines we're talking about in these 3. So what we're going to do is we're going to go chronologically. Now keep in mind, I'm not an expert. I'm merely a child for some of you guys. But I do have a lot of experience from looking at the threads. I'm a big thread guy. I love to go on the forums and just learn about these engines. These are all engines that I love. I don't hate on any of these engines. What it means by D and F here is simply engines that are not efficient at what they might be giving you. All right? It doesn't mean they're bad. If you have one of these, don't feel bad. They're still great engines. You're better off than any other consumer that has your inline 4s and your V6s. So I'm not even hating on you. So let's start. I decided that I want to go chronological. So let's start with really one of the first engines I think about when I think American V8, and that's the Ford 4.6 2 valve. So right after the Windsor, they made the modular 2 valve, and the one I really think about when I think the 4.6, the one that's like most relevant today, is the New Edge 4.6, and those make about 260 horsepower. They're not bad, but they don't really take the power as well as other engines. However, they're dirt cheap. And so a lot of people get into New Age Mustangs just because of that. They're just dirt cheap. They're basically, New Age Mustangs are basically the new, my bad, the new Nissan Silvia. That's basically what they are. And so because of that, they go in D tier. One of the lowest engines, but not the worst pick. I mean, you could do worse, right? The next is the 4.6 SVT 4 valve. Now this is something that not many kids will know about. But if you see a 99 or 2000 SVT Cobra, it's not a Terminator. This is a regular NA 4 valve, and these engines are really good, but they make more power than the 4 valve. The 2 valves. So that's already better. But the biggest problem is that if you want to put if you really want to put a supercharger and start making Terminator-like power, you have to swap in a Terminator basically. You know, you got to do your pistons and crank. And because they use an aluminum block instead of the iron block that the Terminator has, you can see where I'm going here. It's not really like a quarter miler. It does a lot of things good, but it doesn't do everything perfect. So it goes here. Now, speaking of iron block, here is a very special engine that just isn't perfect. And I know about this engine because I got into the Cobra R hype. I really think the Cobra R, if they were able to give us more of the Cobra R's engine, I think I would have a New Edge myself. And I'm talking about the 544 valve, which is found in the Navigator and Cobra R, and the SVT Lightning truck engine. And these go in the same category because they're so rare. They're both very rare now. The 4 valve is a good engine, but it's not the most tunable thing. It's best kept naturally aspirated. And the SVT Lightning has a lot of problems, block cracks, things like that. You wouldn't expect it from an iron block, but it is true. It is the case. And again, you find them in trucks that are very rare now, so they go in the D tier. Speaking of bad engines, 4.63 valve. Everything that the 2 valve is, the 3 valve does worse. It's very strange, because the 3 valve makes more power stock, but it takes power a lot worse. And so the 3 valve is the first F tier engine on the list. It's also only found in like the worst of the worst cars and trucks. I mean, I don't hate the V8 Mustangs. They're really nice outside, but I would swap in any other V8. Honestly, I'd swap in a 2 valve. A built 2 valve is a lot more fun than a built 3 valve. And keeping the chronology going, the Terminator, which is one of the best engines that Ford has ever built, is an A tier engine. It's not a hot rod engine because, of course, it doesn't make the power for it, but it is one of the best engines, bar none. It is, I think, one of the first engines on YouTube that was making 1,000 horsepower. It is really worth looking into it. I love these engines. I want a Terminator. Like, that is really my goal. I mean, any of these people that have these kinds of engines, which the modular, like, everyone has had a modular in their life. Any hot rodder has had a modular in their life. At this point, I mean, they all are trying to get the Terminator power, and so that's why it goes in A tier. But if you look later on the list, and this is a very surprising thing, going with the DOHC, when Ford did that, they kept the SOHC for the truck tiers, and this is where you get into the like, old reliable engines. So the 6.2 is old reliable. It's not a bad engine. It could go in D tier, but it's best kept stock. It really doesn't like anything, any kind of mods, and there's really not that many people that mod them. So I'd suggest just keeping it old and reliable. And they're really good in Raptors. That's the main goal with them. They're great in Raptors. They're great in just regular 6.2s. Regular 6.2 F-150, F-250s that are turned into, crawlers. Those are really the best. So it can't really go into these other tiers because they're not swappable. They're not supposed to make power. They never were in sports cars. So they stay in this right here. Back to the DOHCs though. The Coyote 1st and 2nd gen is one of the best engines ever. Many people consider it better than the Terminator. I will put it a little better than the Terminator. And that's for a very good reason. They make more power. They flow better. The heads flow better. You can put a supercharger on it and make just as much power as the Terminators. And although it might have some heating issues over like a stock Terminator, I mean, they're just better stock. They make as much power stock as the Terminators, almost as much. And then the third gens are brand new, and they make more power. But the biggest problem is they changed the internals. They no longer need, I believe it's piston rings. They no longer need it, and I think that will affect reliability, long-term reliability. A lot of people have said this. So in terms of engines, they're A tier, but they're not high A tier. They're kind of low A tier. That's just my opinion, though. Now let's get into the behemoth. The behemoth is Chevy. Chevy has so many engines to give us. And so let's really start lowest of the low and then go high. So the lowest I can think of is the Gen 2. So the Gen 2 is an old reliable engine. It's not the worst. Actually, no. It actually goes higher than that. It actually goes D tier. So, not the worst engine. Good taking power. It's not bad at taking power. It'll go. If you buy a 4th gen Camaro and you got an LT1, it's not a big deal. Just put in cam, head. You're making as much as a stock LS1. That's not a big deal. But they don't take power as well as other engines. There's not that much of a tunability market for them. Actually, your 4.6 will be probably cheaper to tune to make as much power, or more power actually. So the Gen 2s are kind of limited, and they're not so great. But the Gen 2's kind of a big brother, or should I say younger brother, is the LS1, and the LS1 is a easy A tier right here. A tier. Lots of tuners. Stock, it makes bunch of power. It's really good at power actually. Cams plus head make easy 400, mid 400 horsepower. You really don't need an LS6. That's pretty much the big thing. You don't need a ZU6 to make power with your C5s. One of the pretty much literally invented the whole engine swapping scene. I mean the modern day engine swapping scene. The small block 350 was the old swapping scene, but the LS1 brought it back. And they're really good with turbos. That's a big thing with the LS1s. They're A tier. Very, very good. The slightly newer one, which I just talked about, the LS6, is good, but it's not great. And the big problem is that, okay, yeah, I brought the new Cathedral Port heads, but they lost some of the reliability that the LS1 has. And that's just from some forum posts that talked about them. It goes in B tier. It's a good engine. It still makes the same power, basically. I mean, you just have to worry about kind of your valve dropping and things like that. Speaking of valve dropping, we're going to talk about the LS7 real quick, because that's pretty much the next one, the Z06's younger brother and bigger brother. That's an easy exotic. That's actually top one of the best engines in the world, easily. But again, you don't want to swap them and most cars don't want to swap them. They're too expensive. You can tune them. They're very good, but also valve drop problems. Too big of valves. That's really what it is. The engine was too big. That's the problem, right? So it goes in the exotic tier. It's still a very good A tier. Probably fit in the A tier just fine. I mean, give it a couple years, it'll go in maybe even hot rods. We don't know yet. But currently, you can only get in a Z06 or a Camaro 5 Z28, and that's it. And you don't want to swap it, so you're never gonna see it on the road, except if you see a boomer. So that's that with that one. Now the Gen 4 aluminum. Actually, you know what? Let's get into the Gen 3s real quick. Gen 353. So this is one of the best engines ever. We're talking about specifically the iron block 5.3. So you will find 6.0s with iron blocks. You could kind of put this in the same category here. Truck V8s. One of the best swappable engines ever. Very, very cheap. We're talking like $500 easily. And that's in Canadian. I don't even know. I think in the States you could probably get them for like 50 fucking dollars. Like a freaking McDonald's feast is the price of one of these. So they're very, very good. Obviously, you'd want to like gut out an LS1, put the guts of an LS1 into a 5.3, and you got a build right there. But again, because of how cheap they are, they go A tier, and they take turbos just fine. I mean, again, heads, cam, that kind of stuff. You're gonna have to fix them. You can't really enjoy them stock. They're not great stock, right? So that's why it goes A tier, not hot rod tier. Then the Gen 4 aluminums. So the aluminums are a little worse. They're just not as strong. They won't take turbos as well. But they're still very good. I mean, if you swap in the right things, they're good. It's just stock. You just can't do as much stock. Like, you really need guts. You need the guts of something else, and that's just not fun. And now let's go into the LS2s/L76s. So these are also your Gen 4 iron and aluminum cathedral port 6.0s. So these ones are much better than most of these. They'd probably go right here. Actually, right here. They take superchargers, they do all these things, but they need a little bit more attention than your LS1s for that stuff. So, in terms of money, it'll cost you around the same as a Terminator, but it'll make a lot more power than a Terminator. So that's why it's a little better. Again, Coyotes are a little better than that, so we keep it there. Let's go back to a Ford. The 5.4. So the 5.4 is a very good B tier, but it doesn't go in A. And I think you guys kind of know why. They're very cheap now. Well, much cheaper than they used to be. They used to be 60 grand for a GT500, but they're just not swappable. If you want to tune them, they make a lot of power, but at some point you actually have to remove the engine. That's something you don't have to do with the Terminator. So in a lot of applications, the Terminator makes more power than the 5.4. The 5.4 is will have to be removed to do it. And before, it used to be not so much of a big deal because you only had two kinds of GT500 buyers. You had those who had enough money to actually make more power, or you had this boomers that wanted to keep it stock because it's a collector's car. So that's really why it's B tier. Then the 5.8s. The 5.8s are hot rod. Easily hot rod level. The 5.8s are really the first big power American V8s, like 1,000 horsepower American V8s. Yeah, I did say the Terminators made 1,000 horsepower on YouTube first, but the 5.8s really made 1,000 horsepower out the factory. So that's a lot different. The 5.8s are great. They're literally the reason why we have Hellcats and other engines. So, we're not even gonna get into that shit. By far one of the best engines. First best engine on the list. Okay, let's go back to let's go back to Chevy. I'm very sorry guys about that. The LS4. So the LS4 is a all reliable and D tier engine. So it's good engine. It's basically like a 5.3, like any other 5.3, but it's goes into only two cars. You'll only find them in two cars: the Monte Carlo SS and the Grand Prix GXP. And because of that, they're very rare, and you need to do some flywheel changes to actually be able to put it in rear-wheel drive. So they're best to be kept in a front-wheel drive application. So because of that, they're not great for everything. They're really just good at being stock and at staying in their cars. Not a swap god like the other engines. So we keep it there. Let's talk about another hot rod engine, the LS3. LS3 is an easy hot rod engine. Goes in everything. Good. It's good NA. That's one thing that I'm not gonna like. The other hot rod engines are not gonna be like that. But this is one of the only ones that I would say good NA, and you don't need anything else. So that stays there. Then the LSA. LSA also is one of the best. And it's slightly better than the 5.8s just because it's, you can find them easier. I mean, and again, the LS3, you can turn the LS3 into LSA. You just need the Eaton M122. That's pretty much it. The 5.8 has a better supercharger, but it was much more rare. I believe it's the 127. You guys can correct me there. And then we have the Gen 5s. And Gen 5 is a high A tier, but its direct injection drops it a bit, because they're really only found in trucks and Camaros, and at this point, they're just too rare. I don't suggest getting one. They're not good for swaps. Okay, let's go back to a garbage tier Chevy, and that's the Caddy North Star. So the Caddy North Star is a interesting engine because on one side it has really bad backstory. On the other side, you can find them in STS V8s and STS Vs. So because of that, they're very good engines. They're just not tunable for the 99% of us. I have considered getting an STS V, and those ones are very good to take power, but otherwise they're trash. So I'm just gonna put them in all reliable. You know what? I could even put it there. I don't even care. Like, they're really just that bad. I wouldn't get one unless you really kept it stock, unless it's an STSV, which is rare. So you guys don't care. So what are we missing here? We're missing some Chevy Gen 5. So Gen 5 LT4 is very high tier. Not as good as the LS3 in a lot of ways, but still very good. And the LT6, which is the high revving Chevy engine that just came out. So that's pretty much it for those. The LT6 makes sense. The GT350. Okay, so this contender is actually the GT350 Voodoo and the GT500. So because I have different applications, they kind of go in different ways. The GT350 stock is more of an exotic engine. The Voodoo supercharged 5.2 is more of a hot rod engine, and it really splits the difference here. So because of that, it kind of goes here. It's more the 5.2 is more powerful. The 350 is more more abundant than the LT6. The LT6 will be very rare, I believe. I don't think they're gonna make that many. Not as many as the LT4s. So it's kind of weird that way, how they're basically the same engine. Like, I have a lot of similar engine parts, but they're completely different beasts, where you could kind of put it between exotic and hot rod. So it kind of goes in here. And now finally we have the Dodge. Why did I leave Dodge at the very end? Well, they have the least kinds of engines. They sell almost as many engines as the other two, but they have the least kinds of engines. I want to stress that. I could have split the Mopars a little better, because they have more types than what I wrote, but I can get into depth. So first step is the Mopar 5.7. The Mopar 5.7 is a strong B tier. Very good engine. You can get them for absolutely nothing. They're almost as cheap as your truck 5.3s. They tune amazingly. There's really no problem with them. The only thing is that they're a little heavier than your 5.3s. Actually, your 5.3s are much lighter. The 5.7s are quite heavy. They got your iron blocks. And they're just amazing for boost, but they're just too heavy to make most swaps. And to be honest, they're also attached to a automatic usually, so it's a little harder to get a nice daily drivable experience. And again, you're just not gonna like who does it really benefit? It benefits the boomers. And if you're gonna make any power, like, you're gonna have to make transmission modifications and all this kind of stuff. That's not really for everyone, right? Versus in LS1, you can put it, like, you can find them in Camaro 4s, turbo, and that's it. With the Chargers, you actually have to do like turbos plus head plus transmission, and then you kind of have that deal. So it's a little different. But if you can find a Challenger RT with a 6-speed, I mean, it's perfect. You don't need a Camaro, and that's what's so great about them. The next engine I'm going to talk about is actually the predecessor to the 5.7, and that was the 4.7 and the 5.9. So the 4.7 will be found in the Dakota only, and the 5.9 you will find it in the Dakota RT and the older Dodge 1500s. They're good stock. They're not great tuning. They're just good stock. They would be great. Like, if we were in the 2000s, like early 2000s, it would be one of the best engines you could get. But again, there's not really any point of hot rod, like putting this in a hot rod, because again, you got all of these engines. So they're good in the old reliable category. If you get a Dakota 4.7 and the 5.9, it's not bad. Otherwise, Next is the 6.1. So the 6.1 is the SRT8 Mopar, the SRT8 engine. And the SRT8 is very good. It's honestly A tier, and I'm going to put it right here. So it's a little better than the Terminator. It's got better internals. The only real thing is doing like piston rings and things like that. But otherwise, it can take a supercharger very easily. I've seen a lot of people with their Jeep SRT8s, and they just make tons of power. They're also more abundant than the Terminators. They're cheaper than the Coyote 3rd gens. They're around the same level as the LS2s. The LS2s will need more work to make as much power as the 6.1s. 6.1s can basically be stock and make tons of power. The 392s are lower. And the reason is that the 392s, yeah, they do make 1,000 horsepower with a Helion twin turbo kit. Yeah, sure. But they heat up more because their pistons are not as efficient. They cheap down on the pistons. And you won't find them as cheap. 6.1s you will find dirt cheap. And the only reason why the 5.7 isn't up here is that you will have to work on them quite a lot to make as much power. Otherwise, it's exactly like a 6.1. Like I honestly, like if you get a 5.7 and you put in like about $3,000 into it, oh, not $3,000. What am I talking about? $3,000 plus labor, so it could be up to $7,000. If you put $7,000 into a 5.7, it's gonna be the same. So it's a very good engine. And then finally, you got the Hellcat series. This is the final engine on this list of Hellcat series. What do I think about it? Well, it's a easy hot rod tier. Very, very good engine. Everyone loves it. Hellcat's a great engine. But the problem is that they're too rare. There's not enough of them. They're not as that, like if you have a Hellcat in your Challenger Charger, it's great. You're happy. But taking it out and actually trying to make more power and things, it's just so hard. It's really, really hard. And so they're just great to have as a crate. They're not so great. They're great to put plop. They're not so great to tune, to actually change around. The 5.7s and the 6.1s are better for that. And yeah, of course, there's different power levels, and that makes total sense. Yeah, Hellcats are made to make 1,000 horsepower. Absolutely. But again, because they're so expensive stock, they're like $30,000, and for the crate, they come out in I think the cheapest Hellcat I've ever seen is like 55,000 Canadian. Might be wrong on that one. Maybe the 40,000 now. I have no idea. But because of that, the LT4s are just better. You could buy a Camaro ZL1 for a little less than a Hellcat. They do make a little less power, but they can tune just as much. I mean, they're really the same. The LSAs are a little more expensive, but the LS3s are still king because the LS3s you can put an LSA supercharger, cam, head, and you make it as much as a Hellcat. Incredible how that works today. So now let's get into the conclusion thoughts really quickly. What can you retain from this information? All of these engines are great, but be wary that if you're in lower here, you're not going to want to tune as much. You're going to want to keep it stock more. If you're in the higher tiers, tuning is going to be great. It might take more effort, but the percentage of power you can get out of these are easy 1,000 with little to no mods. If you're up here, you're a winner, but you also have to be wary of the budget you're going to put in. If you're down here, you're going to put almost as much budget and make none of the same power. So that's the big thing. If you keep it stock, most of these engines are great for their application. If you tune them, if you make a bunch of power, if you find the right application for each one of them, you're going to be very, very happy. That is why you should get an American V8. That's why you shouldn't get a V6. That's a pussy. V6s are shit. You shouldn't get a turbo 4-cylinder. Yeah, okay, you made a bunch of boost, but at the end of the day, you're not going to make 100 horsepower off of just head and cam. You're never going to do that with a 4-cylinder. So do consider a V8 in your next buy. That's all. Hope you guys have a great summer.